Hello, and welcome to the Humanity Leadership Podcast. I'm David Wheatley, and we're here to talk all things leadership. And my guest this week is Thor Flusserson, and I've been practicing that one to make sure I get that right too. He'll, I'm sure, tell me any second now. And Thor is the Senior Director of Global Learning and Development at the Kellogg Company. Welcome, Thor.
Thank you so much. Thanks, David. Thanks for having me.
And the pronunciation was Flusserson.
Flossason. Yeah, it's very close.
We've been talking Viking roots, so and actually this is kind of interesting because we're speaking from, you're actually in Iceland at the moment.
I am in Iceland. I'm in Reykjavik, Iceland, where I've been here for the last month or so. So typically come here in the summer for a little bit of a getaway, but now with COVID, it's changed things up. So I'm doing some remote work for an extended period of time, and
Well,
it's working great.
That's good, and that's one of the reasons why I was interested to talk to you today, because you've been leading the Kellogg Company's charge on LinkedIn learning and a lot of remote learning. And then when we hit COVID, everybody's charging in that direction. And I thought it'd be interesting for you to potentially share some of the things you've learned and some of the tips you've got about how we transition from a lot of the face-to-face to virtual, and then what works virtual and what have you found doesn't work virtually.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
start off, tell us a little bit about, I always try and get people to give me a mini bio in kind of 30 seconds of your history.
Yeah, so I've my background in education-wise is in psychology. So my entryway into learning was really working with children and students with learning disabilities and developmental disabilities and autism, and so really working with principles of learning with teaching skills. And then I pivoted into seeing more opportunities, applying my experience and learning more into how do we do this with adults in the workplace. So I moved to the US to go to graduate school at Western Michigan University. This was several years ago, where I did my master's and doctorate in psychology with a focus on learning. So I've had different roles within Kellogg when I started with them 12, 13 years ago, and most of the time has been in a learning related role, supporting different functions, and now kind of head of global learning development. So passionate about that, passionate about the potential it brings, and I'm an advocate of learning, creating learning environments, learning cultures, learning experiences that really help people grow professionally and personally as well. So that's a very short bio.
That's a short history. It's interesting. We both started in, I started as elementary ed as well.
Right, exactly.
So it's,
yeah.
And then I just gone up the scale until I landed at a place that was comfortable. But so some of those things that you've learned, though, when it comes to the virtual learning, how's that transition from the work you've done as an educator to making sure that virtual learning works in a corporate environment?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting when we look at how COVID has changed everything, and what we're seeing today. We were trending towards this, being more virtual, being more savvy with using the technology. The simple thing, or that's not simple thing, but what COVID did was just accelerated that. It said, you need to do more of this, and you need to do it now.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, we were already on that journey. We had started that a couple of years ago, saying, okay, we have 30,000 employees all over the world. It's difficult to get learning in a timely fashion in front of the people who need it when they need it and all that. So it's difficult to scale the traditional model around, I'm going to get in front of you face to face with a group of people, and I'm going to do this for thousands of people. Can be done, can be very effective, but when you look at it, there are ways of streamlining some of those experiences, and then when you put them in an effective virtual format, that can certainly work well. The channel is almost, it is relevant, but it's, when you think about it, as long as you get the right context and the right content delivered in the right way with the right people, and it's reinforced. It's really, we're aiming for, we're changing something, we're building skills, we're changing something. If we do that right, it doesn't really matter if it's in a classroom and if it's in a virtual space. One thing I would say, though, is the challenge that we have now in front of us with having everything now in the virtual, a lot of things virtually or online, is engagement, right? Because we as humans, we engage with others, and we I miss giving my coworkers a hug, and I miss, being in that, that's part. I'm not saying it's part of learning, but it's part of the learning environment and learning experiences. So that
Mhm.
might have, an impact indirectly into how we interact. And also the magic that happens when we do more of the traditional is the things that happen during breaks and on the side and networking and all those things that you may be losing now with virtual, right? So the net impact and outcomes from a, let's call it an in-person session somewhere, it has some other things that it's hard to capture in the virtual
Mhm.
environment. Now we're getting more savvy with how we use that in a creative way. There are better tools, and we can do things differently. But I think when we look at it, we're seeing we've never seen this much adoption of any learning programs in since I started with Kellogg. I mean, we're seeing numbers that are very, very impressive, that people are more continuously learning because they have continuous access to learning, and they can do it when it works for them. So a lot of benefits. And but again, your question about my role as an educator, it's not just making things virtual because it's flash and we have Zoom and we have cool tools. It's always thinking about, again, the context, the content. Is it, how do we package it? How do we cater to the needs of the people you're working with? So it's that we can't, you always have to pay attention to that. And one of the things I saw earlier on is people, like organizations and some of our programs, people said, how do I now convert my 2-day session into a virtual? You don't do that. You recreate with some of the elements of what you did virtually. So it's not about just pivoting and saying, I'm going to throw it into Zoom now and I'm going to sit with you for 2 days on camera. No, that's a call. So I think it's recontextualizing that and redesigning. But I think, my long story short, I think you can probably get to a lot of the same outcomes you would in a live face-to-face session. But again, there are some elements that might be lost.
Right. And I think that's because we're talking about a continuum, if you like, that at one end of the continuum is face to face in the same room. The other end of the continuum is an individual working on their own in their own time. There's kind of a spot in the middle that I know we've found that is a small group on Zoom. We can do a lot of the same stuff as the face to face, clever use of breakout rooms, clever use of different interaction will generate some of that that you get from being in the same room. But you've also seen a lot more uptake on the other end where individuals are just self-motivated to do more training. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and I think the most for learners, for our employees, I think the most very important quality is to be self-aware and understand what I need and and when I need it, right? Because when you do sometimes those big sessions, it's because we have a need, right? We have a collective need as an organization or as a team to go and learn something. But a lot of times that doesn't really apply because it's what I need now is something that I need now, not the rest of my team. So I need to go and consume whatever content and learn um, based on my own needs versus the team. So I think what we're also trying to educate people is, like, you are really empowered to learn, right? And when we have more of a catalog driven or schedule driven learning, so, oh, you're gonna roll in this program and it's 2 months from now, and it's, I actually need that now, right? Or I may need that later. So I think it gives us some added flexibility. So we've been really emphasizing that, we're not going to force feed you. We're going to give you an environment where you can kind of seek out and get what you need when you need it.
Hmm.
Which is, I think it's really where things in terms of learning and development is trending. So we're getting more insights based on on data, right? If you look at, okay, Thor has this role, he's based on this location, these are his skills, these are his gaps, and then whatever the system or the environment somehow brings in what I would need, right? Whether it is an actual online asset or is it a name of someone, it's a mentor, it's a coach. Because for me, I think the biggest impact when it comes to learning is what happens throughout your day, right? When I reflect on my career, the biggest learning moments and experience and how I've learned, it's not through a course or an article or on e-learning that I went through. It's it's some of that, but then it all comes together in interactions with other people, in an opportunity to go in front of people, present something, talk through something, problem solve something. So I think that's also important to realize that, yeah, virtual learning is part of the learning, right? Is you're formally going through some sort of an experience, but what happens then is really where the magic happens,
Right.
right? If I have somebody, and learning is a social event as well, right? You, even though you're on your own, you're learning from looking at a screen and going through some things. It is something that's socially supported and validated and enabled, right? So if I learn something today, I may share that with my teammates or recommend it or say, hey, let's talk about this. This is a new trend and I'm interested in. So that's how you make it happen versus just it's a solitary event, right?
So it's
So
all about the application anyway. I mean, it's
absolutely.
learning, the training that you're doing is about creating a bigger tool bag for people,
Yeah.
but that's
Yeah.
useless unless they're actually able to apply that tool in the workplace.
Absolutely. And it's interesting when you see kind of the market out there, marketplace with different technologies and platforms being launched. I mean, they're all great. And what they don't necessarily do is, and some say they do, but I'm not sure, maybe they do, but it's how do you then, how do you go from learning to doing is
Mhm.
that kind of gap, which is so critical. And that's, I think, where leaders come in, where teams come in, where coworkers come in to really make that happen and kind of unlock that learning.
So if you've got like a manufacturing plant, say in Manchester, England, just happen to, if they're hypothetically, and you've got some supervisor on the floor that wants to develop their own skills, what do you see that says that they're applying it? Because they can go and take the LinkedIn class or wherever it
Hmm.
is, the
Hmm.
format you're using. What measure do you have to make sure that they're actually applying it in that plant?
Yeah. So we have some kind of utilization data that shows that they're consuming, they're going through that, and then we have some inferred data and anecdotal data. So we have a lot of surveys that go out, like our engagement survey that goes out, and that measures leader effectiveness. Right?
Hmm.
So you may see trends year over year. You can filter by certain groups. Here's the group that did go through this versus group that didn't go through, and you see there's an incremental jump in the group that did go through in terms of engagement, right? So we look for those, and then we also have some ways of surveying or focus grouping or kind of going after and looking what's actually happening. Some of that is, again, anecdotal. We have stories. We look at things like retention and some things that are like a bit inferred, but we can say that yeah, we're seeing a correlation here. This is probably the holy grail of as a learning professional. It's really hard to crack because you never have full control over, oh, everybody's doing great now because of my learning, right, or my program or my solution. But there's a lot of other variables that came into play. But at the end of the day, of course, we need to be able to say that we're having an impact, and here's how. So another thing is also what I've seen is you can drive engagement in people um, just by providing access to ongoing development, whether they're applying it or not. I mean,
Hmm.
that's not the way it should be, but there is a benefit. If I'm being provided with a, let's call it a benefit almost. Yes, you have an opportunity to grow your skills, learn new skills, and this even goes to some of the programs we provide. For example, LinkedIn Learning that you provided or you mentioned is you can learn things that are not work related. I think LinkedIn Learning has like how to play the guitar or how to record music, right? Doesn't have to do with my role as the supervisor in the Manchester plant, but I'm getting some opportunities to kind of it's broader development when you think about it. It's not primary, obviously, but there are some added kind of benefits that we can see maybe in numbers like engagement and retention because it's provided to me by the company.
So I mean, that gives you data to track then, and you can see even if the person's learning French and the guitar, you can still measure that against, am I seeing a greater retention? Am I seeing that employee be more engaged? And it really doesn't matter whether it's supervisory leadership or, the,
Hypothetically on the engagement front, but obviously we're focused on skills, of course. We want, if we're training that supervisor on whether it's developing their people or providing feedback, those are the core things. But then there might be some peripheral things that are, in the grand scheme of things, they have an positive impact on engagement and
yeah.
retention, because now and that's almost when you think about when organizations provide perks to employees, right? I get a gym membership, or I get access to whatever, and how does that help you with performing? You're not learning anything, is it? But it's those things that exist in the environment for me as an employee that I can take advantage of, and it's helping me grow in some way or another.
Right. And I was talking to another colleague, friend of mine, Judy Brown, in a couple of episodes ago about leadership and poetry. And one of the things that she said is that the poetry can unlock a creative side of the brain that gets you thinking differently when it comes to applying it to manufacturing side or the
Very interesting.
functional side, which I wonder if there's data that says, or maybe do some study to see if there's data that even though they're learning the guitar or French, they're unlocking something that's making them a more creative leader on the other side of the fence.
That absolutely could. And when you think it also from almost like a mindfulness point of view, right? If people are they're able to unplug, right? I don't have to just, go through all the leadership training or all this Excel training or whatever the skill may be. I'm actually going to decouple now and I'm going to spend some time on gardening, learning about how to plant something or, it might be interesting. I mean, I don't have the data, but, my hypotheses would be there is something that there's a positive net benefit coming out of that.
Right.
So, but it's an empirical question at the end of the day. So we need to do
the
the
whole
study there. Yeah,
I want to see your
coming soon. Yeah,
yeah. Well, because what you're defining actually, in my mind, is a complementary set. That it's not that the online learning is going to take over. It's that the online learning is complementary, and especially at times like this, it's become more critical, more important. And so that continuum that I paint of face-to-face, kind of a hybrid version, and then individual online, all three are valuable. And it's just that we're getting better at being able to measure some of the stuff that is online, and that gives us more data to be able to say what's working and what isn't.
Yeah, and it's even if we boil it down to, because it's platform agnostic or solution agnostic almost, because at the end of the day, it's about, does the employee know what they need in terms of learning? Do they know where to go for that? Do they know how to apply it? You can deliver, you can answer those questions. Yes, we can provide all these digital assets, but it is that and a whole other set of variables that play a role in that. Again, going back to the team, going back to experiences, going back to, there might be engaged in other activities outside of work that is part of that holistic kind of developmental framework. So yeah, I think the online the magic there is just the speed and scale, right? You can really get things across the globe quickly, and you can be targeted and you can track. You can do that in a matter of, right now I can, after this our chat here, I can go in and I'm gonna, assign something to 3,000 users in Latin America, and I'm gonna ask them to do this, and I'm, no, not the best way approach to push it out like that, but it's if I were to do the same non-virtually or non-online, if we would just, okay, how much money do we have and how we're going to travel, and we're going to do all those things. And by the time I get to that audience, it's too late. They needed this the next week and not 2 months from now.
So there's a really,
but there's
accessibility piece in that, isn't it? I remember doing training in the Battle Creek plant at 2:00 in the morning because we were trying to train all three shifts.
Right. Exactly.
And what you're saying here is that you've got an advantage to be able to put it out so people can get hold of it when it's best for them to learn. Rather.
And there's an interesting, what I've kind of started to notice is also perceptions play a big part in this. Is if my mindset is, so if I look at online learning, it's not real learning. And this is actually something I picked up from my boys, because due to COVID, they went all online learning, and they said, "Dad, I'm just doing this stuff. It's online. It's not real learning." So they're viewing it as, I need to be with others. I need to be with an instructor. I need to be there in person. So I think it's a bit of probably we'd call it change management, to help people see that, no, it doesn't have to be one way or another, right? It's coaching people, helping people through this transition, because we may see in some demographics that people are more open to this than others, right? So I think it's always understanding the user, what they need at the end of the day. Before you go and say, hey, just log on and magic happens, you need to make sure that they have the prerequisite skills and understanding and mindset really about, this can work. You would never assign a course on swimming to someone online and say, you're going to be able to swim 1,000 meters next week. They would drown, right? We can't commit that to that type of skill building.
Right.
So that meaning it's always, it has to happen in the right context, right? You can't just make something happen in it as a digital asset, right? It is always, what is the skill? What's the content? What are we asking the person to do differently as a result of this training?
Right.
So I think that's another factor. You can't online-ize it to make it happen, right? You just have to think through it holistically and at the end of the day, what do we want the outcome to be? That's kind of the starting point.
Right. And you need to have people who are fairly motivated to go into that environment and pull it out, which I'm sure is another sign that you're seeing is some people are motivated, and that's probably an indicator as to who they are versus those
Yeah,
who.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, is there one thing you'd advise, or one thing you'd find that hey has worked or hasn't worked apart from swimming that you say this has really worked online and this has really struggled?
So I think a lot of the things that we're seeing. So one thing that we did recently was we and we had started this before COVID hit, but all of our onboarding now is virtual, right? You join Kellogg day one or week one, and you start to engage with other newcomers in the virtual space. And we were confident, the team that built this, we were like, this is going to work. But there's some pushback from the organization, like, oh, you need to get people together, and that's part of onboarding. And yes, I get it, but can you really do that at scale and continue? Because we were only, we were not able to consistently onboard everybody globally, but now we can. So in a way, we saw that yes, it works because you're giving people consistent information globally, regardless of where they are. But then we're also giving them some autonomy to complete part of their learning on their own. So it's not you have to be with people for 16 hours in a room, virtual or otherwise. We give them a snapshot, but then it's up to you to finish some other required learning over the next few weeks. So I think programs like onboarding, and in some cases leadership, right? If you're teaching things like coaching, and we're doing that right now with some of our leadership development programs. We're doing them in this kind of coaching sessions and debrief, and kind of we're using flipped classroom format for that. I think what wouldn't work is probably a lot of the kind of the when we go to our, for example, our plants where there's a lot of technical tactical things where you're setting up and you're doing manual things where it's not about content, it's about actual physical movements and tools and things like that. Obviously that would be limited. There's an interesting I'm familiar with the gentleman who's leading up learning at McDonald's, and he tells a story of when they were so excited about online technology. So they had kiosks in back of the restaurants where people were learning how to make French fries on the laptop. They were just simulations, and I was putting the thing in, and why not just use the actual equipment? It's right there. So sometimes we get so excited about the technology. It's like, no, you can actually, if you're teaching somebody how to make a burger, use the grill, use the, you don't have to have them drag and drop a burger on a virtual grill. So I think that's an example of, it may work if you're doing this as a pre-work or getting people familiar with, yes. But if you want to reach a proficiency level, you can't do that online. And that is something, I mean, I think things that have to do with interpersonal skills like coaching. I mean, you could teach me how to coach others right here and that right now, right? You can give me some tips, and here's a model, and here's how we do it. I would ask you questions. We go back and forth. That's online, right? So I think it's always going back to those outcomes. Can you reach those outcomes fully virtual?
Right.
So yeah.
It's funny, we've transitioned through COVID to virtual coaching. A lot of our coaching previously was face-to-face, and we went to 100% virtual. And it's interesting, different people want to come back to face-to-face, and a lot of people are saying, no, this is working, and it saves a lot of time. It means I can switch from one to the other. And I've always said that face-to-face is 100%. The phone coaching is about 50%. The virtual coaching is, I used to say 80%, but I actually think it's getting higher than that. Because people are getting so much more used to it. It seems like you said, we've amplified and accelerated our comfort level with this, and I think we're going to see a lot more of it as we move forward.
Exactly. I was just wondering if and this would be another study maybe, and I was reflecting on this the other day on when email came out, right? Some decades ago, when people started to use email, I'm sure there was a similar type of pushback. I'm going to send this electronic message. I'm not going to handwrite it or call this person on the phone. We're going to lose some elements of the communication in that. And yes, but all these years later, we say email probably overused and all that, not always effective, but I mean, there's a tremendous value in technology if it's used appropriately. We always have to go through the change curve on that.
Mm-hmm.
People just question the legitimacy or the effectiveness of something like this. And I have some reservations, right? We can't do everything. So I do look forward to the time when we can get back together as teams. We can do things more in person. It's going to be different, but I think we don't have a choice really. We have to get very comfortable with not only learning, obviously, but just utilizing this for collaboration, for partnering with teams internally and externally, and just its ways of working really.
It's just changing the way everything works. I mean, the
Yeah.
fact that you're in Iceland, working for a company in Battle Creek now, and I was talking to somebody yesterday who's working for a company here in Kalamazoo, and they're moving to North Carolina because they can, and everything's going to this virtual work station, and we're going to a virtual company at the end of August. So we're going to see a lot more of this, and it makes what you're doing even more interesting. And I want to see both of those studies you're going to do. Sound like a good PhD study. So Thor, thank you very much. I appreciate your time and the chat and the information and you sharing. Thor Flusserson is the Senior Director of Global Learning and Development at the Kellogg Company. Thank you very much. This has been the Humanity Leadership Podcast. I'd like to thank Thor. I'm David Wheatley. Thanks to Brian Spencer and Finkel for the music. Please share any feedback and suggestions you have about who you'd like to hear from. Please go to iTunes and give us a review, because that helps other people find this podcast. Subscribe and stay healthy. We'll see you next time. Thanks very much.